Hello, and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. It is your host, Weeb Union, and in this one, we start out in the south in the direction of Levadne, where there is a small advance by the Russians. They kicked the Ukrainians away from the roads connecting Levadne with the recent advances here in the eastern parts. This gives a road connection between the Russian forces in this section of the front line, not just between Pryotne to the river line here to the north, but also in between the two sides for better connection between Levadne here in the west and the river line in the east. This strengthens the Russians' front line and will continue operations along the river line to expand their zone of control and to develop the situation for further developments across the river line towards Novodarivka or in the western direction towards Olhivske to capture the Ukrainian fortified positions. Moving on to the Pokrovsk section of the front line, there's further advances by the Russians south of Selydove. The Russians continue their operations to cut off the supplies of the Ukrainians in the southern, northern, and western flank of Selydove. So far, the Russians have gained fire control over the southern road, and they are within close proximity to somewhat have some sort of a fire control over the northern one. It is not ruled out for the Ukrainians to send supplies through and reinforcements through, but the Russians are within close proximity, so long-range weapons such as artillery and tank weaponry can hit targets on the road. In the direction of Vishneva, in the rear of Selydove, the Ukrainians have complete control over the road. Therefore, it is a limited operational encirclement of Selydove, where the Ukrainians still have several opportunities to resupply Selydove itself. However, it is limited. This Russian advance here to the south of Selydove strengthens the flank of the operation along the railways, as well as allows the Russians to develop offensive operations towards the fortified positions of the Ukrainians here in the area. Gain control of these fortified positions north of Sukharine will allow the Russians to gain control of the remaining parts of the settlement and develop offensive operations towards Kreminna Belka, and in the western direction allows to have physical control over the road at a far enough distance from Selydove that it limits Ukraine's capabilities to launch counterattacks towards the southern direction to open up their supply line yet again, and at the same time it allows Russians to cut off the road completely and then develop offensive operations towards the settlements here in the southwestern parts of Selydove. It will also allow for a stronger flank for operations in the direction of Vishneva further north, the capture of which could lead to the complete encirclement of Ukrainian forces within Selydove. The Ukrainians are not taking this lying down. They have sent the 154th Mechanized Brigade to Selydove to protect the southern flank and the supply lines that they have towards the settlement. The 154th Mechanized Brigade is a Ukrainian brigade which was formed in 2023 for the Ukrainian summer offensive, and this was then refitted just 2 weeks ago with M1117 armored personnel carriers. This, combined with it being an elite brigade, means that the Ukrainians specifically strengthened the brigade to launch these missions to send additional units in and out of Selydove to protect the supply lines and to counterattack the Russian positions in the southern flank of Selydove. This adds the reinforcements the Ukrainians have sent towards Selydove to now 4 brigades, including the 68th Jaeger Brigade, the 152nd Jaeger Brigade, the 25th Airborne Brigade, and now the 154th Mechanized Brigade. What this also shows is that as soon as the Ukrainians receive new aid, whether it is armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, or tanks, they immediately adapt it to a unit and deploy it towards the front line to deal with the Russian offensive operation. And this speaks to the lack of Ukrainian reserves, whether it is in manpower or equipment. The Ukrainians simply do not have enough to deal with the entirety of the front line. In the Kupiansk section of the front line, there's a small advance by the Russians. Yet again, it is a very small one. This is geolocated footage of Russian operations in the outskirts of the settlement of Kozlenikivka, here by the Osk river line. So with this, we see that the Russian offensive operations continue as they attempt to gain a proper foothold within the settlement and develop offensive operations near it. In the Kursk region, we see some developments, but first we have to look at a Ukrainian clearing of the forest patch here near Lipsy. Positional fighting continues in this direction as the Ukrainians are slowly looking to recapture positions. The Russians are holding out with limited forces and resources as the majority of the reserves in the Kharkiv direction was moved to deal with the Ukrainian Kursk incursion, where the Ukrainians have now sent additional reinforcements to deal with the situation. The Russians have continuously launched counterattacks to recapture positions here in the Kursk direction, and the Ukrainians are sending new reinforcements to stop the Russian offensive operations and to prevent a collapse of the front line. If we take a look at the deployment map yet again, we see two new brigades that have arrived over the past week, which is the 47th Mechanized Brigade and the 17th Tank Brigade, which both have recently arrived here in the Kursk direction. The 17th Tank Brigade has been seen to operate in the very northern outskirts of the Kursk incursion, and the 47th Mechanized Brigade was sent to the Klushkovo district, but they did not manage to save the situation and they were pushed out. This likely means that the Ukrainians will redirect their forces from the Klushkovo direction to the Kursk direction to further settle the situation. The Ukrainians have the 21st Mechanized Brigade, the 47th Mechanized Brigade, and the 95th Air Assault Brigade here by the Klushkovo district. If they are sent together with the 17th Tank Brigade to stabilize the situation, the Ukrainians may succeed with that. And this is bringing us to the current situation where there are reports that the Russians are attempting a large-scale encirclement operation where they are looking towards fighting near Malaya Luknia, both from the railways in the north and from their advances in the west. Battles are taking place as we speak in this direction. This is why I've left it in the gray zone, because it is unclear what the outcome will be. We just know that the Ukrainians' recent reinforcements, such as the 17th Tank Brigade, have been sent here within this pocket to deal with the Russian offensive operations in the northern direction, which has managed to recapture some settlements and forest patches. And at the same time, the 47th Mechanized Brigade and the 21st Mechanized Brigade were in the Klushkovo direction and could be sent to deal with the situation here on the western flank of Sutsha, as well as in the southern flank where the Russians have managed to capture some positions over the past few days. Yet at the same time, the Ukrainians refuse to stop their own offensive operations where they're managing to advance here north of Martyonovka. This just speaks as to how I believe that there is a lack of communication between the different Ukrainian units in this section of the front line. Considering the current situation, it seems that the Ukrainians simply operate in the area that they were assigned, and this leads to, well, encirclements of Ukrainian forces, such as what was seen in Lyubimovka and Olgovka, and now the possibility of that happening in the northwestern parts as well. The fact that offensive operations continue despite the western flank being hit hard and the Ukrainians being kicked out of the Klushkovo district does not tell them that the current situation is untenable and they have to redirect forces to secure the defensive operations first and foremost before they can advance further. But despite the current Russian onslaught to recapture the Kursk region, completely kick the Ukrainians out, the Ukrainians still continue their offensive operations. All in all, we see that the current situation in Kursk may not be the operation of the Russians that ends up capturing the entirety of the Kursk region. They may not even succeed with this encirclement operation, considering that the Ukrainians sent additional reinforcements to hold this section of the front line. And based on that, we see that the Ukrainians may look to stabilize the situation yet again by sending new reinforcements to this section of the front line, which is again completely untenable on the Ukrainian side to just continue sending additional reserves into a battle that has already been lost. As I mentioned in a video 2 months ago when the operation first started, the Battle of Koronevo would decide the Ukrainian Kursk incursion. The Battle of Koronevo has been decided. The Russians won the battle, and therefore the Russians have won the Kursk incursion, yet the Ukrainians refuse to give it up. They continue trying, and this will just end up with additional Ukrainian units being spent up fighting in the Kursk region, but there will be likely no more success. And that is all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.